let me. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We are excited you're here. As I mentioned before, it'd be great if you would say hello in the chat and introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from. Be fantastic. Thanks for joining today. My name is Erin Bound-Anderson with Geeks Without Frontiers and the N50 Project's For Womenkind chairperson. I'll be your facilitator for the next hour. I'm joined here by Angie Marr, Geeks Without Frontiers Director of International Programs, who will be behind the scenes and helping to answer questions in the chat as we go. Today, I am so excited. As I mentioned before, I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Bea Rodriguez-Fransen. Dr. Bea Rodriguez-Fransen is the director at Arizona State University Next Lab, bringing together individuals, research, and communities to imagine and co-create humane technology and equitable futures with diverse students, staff, and partners. A decolonial futurist, she was chosen as one of 10 educators across the world to become a TED speaker in February 2024. And you can watch her TED Talk entitled Unlocking Indigenous Knowledge, A New Path for Education. She'll be sharing that link in a little bit. So you'll want to take a look at that. As a senior scholar at ASU's Global Futures Senior Scientists and Scholars Network, she conducts research to help ensure planetary habitability, easy for me to say, and well-being. She's also a global research team member of the Institute for the Study of Colorism, where she focuses on the long-term impacts of colonialism on present-day issues and on future generations. Dr. Rodriguez-Fransen has served in various leadership and fundraising roles in higher education, local government, nonprofit, and entrepreneurial and innovation sectors. And in 2020, she was recognized by the mayor as one of 9 women leaders in the city of Aurora, Illinois, and as Innovator of the Week by Bloomberg Philanthropies for leading a cross-disciplinary team to learn and apply human-centered design across City Hall. A former kettlebell sport coach and competitor, she enjoys lifting kettlebells and spending time with her husband, toddler, and 2 rescue dogs. So, Dr. Rodriguez-Fransen, welcome to this space today. As we discussed in preparation for this event, the N50 For Womenkind initiative is pretty special. Of the 215 organizational members of the N50 project, the issues that face women and girls in particular are always important to the work we do. Access, quality, and meaningful digital connectivity impacts the lives of women and girls differently all over the globe, and understanding those challenges in order to move forward in a way that is thoughtful to context, culture, and history is something that we hold dear. And we know it's important to you too. In fact, these speaker series sessions are designed to showcase and act upon our belief about listening to voices from a wide variety of experiences and expertise from amazing women like yourself. So we're excited to hear your story, what's influenced your thinking, and some applications of this that may have direct implications about advancing gender digital equity. As we begin with the presentation and overview, then we'll move to facilitated Q&A. But please, everyone, team on the call, please use the chat. As you listen, you're inspired, you have questions, please drop those in the chat, and we'll use those to continue our conversation for the next half of the presentation. So with that said, Bea, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Erin. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you're coming from. And I'd like to share my screen now and get started. Let's see. Okay, so the title of this presentation is Decolonial Design Futures from Ideas to Action to Advance Gender Digital Equity. And as Erin mentioned, I am director at ASU Next Lab. And at the end of this presentation, I will share a link to our new annual report so you can learn more about what we do, what our students have done in the past year and continue to do. And I invite you to think about ways that we might collaborate one day, or if you would just like to take a tour, whether it's virtual or in person at Arizona State University, you're more than welcome to visit us. And here is the QR code of my TED Talk, which just became live in May of this year. I delivered it in TED headquarters this past February in front of a live audience. And if you'd like to view it and give me feedback, I'd be happy to hear from you. And just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. The first is some highlights from Dr. Ravi Sterling's For Womenkind talk on gender digital divide. So I'm using that as a jumping point to talk about the solution or the framework that can help us address gender digital equity. And then also some highlights from an article on AI gender equity issues. And then I'll introduce my framework with you, which I developed as part of my research on the Philippines among Filipina educators. And then hone in on the design justice principles, which is embedded in this framework, and then move to questions and answers. So just real quick, gender digital divide talk from Dr. Ravi Sterling. She emphasized that there are persistent and growing gaps in women's access to and use of digital technology. It significantly hampers the ability of digital technology to help women improve their lives. So she mentions that 80% of digital development initiatives fail, and we're unintentionally failing women because we don't understand the communities that we're serving. And in the article by Genevieve Smith and Ishita Rostagi, they talk about AI gender equity issues, how AI systems, many of them have gender bias, and it has profound impacts on the psychological, economic health of women around the world. It also reinforces and amplifies existing harmful gender stereotypes and prejudices. And a contributor to this is who is developing these systems, right? So who and how are they developing these AI systems? So when they looked at the number of females in proportion to males in the field of AI and data science, this was back in 2021, they discovered that 22% in AI and data science field is female. So 2 out of 10 are females, which is basically underrepresenting women. On top of that, we have some recent statistics from the Mobile Gender Gap Report, GSMA Mobile Gender Gap Report, that 265 million fewer women than men across low to middle income countries access the internet on mobile phone. And these women in these countries are 8% less likely than men to own a smartphone. So that's equivalent to 405 million women who do not own a smartphone. And that presents a problem because these technologies generate data about its users. And so if the women's data are not available, that leads to skewed data sets. So the fact that we don't have a lot of women data sets is skewing these AI systems. So for example, when humans are collecting data from medical trials, many women are not represented. There's not a lot of women participants in these trials. Similarly, there are few urban data sets that track and analyze data on gender. So as a result, the infrastructure programs that we create don't often factor their needs. They're really designed around men's needs, like the way we design public transportation or public toilets or street lights. But even when representative data points exist, they may have prejudice built in and reflect inequities in society. So for example, human beings label the data, and that can be subjective. For example, binary female male categories. And when you do this, you continue to marginalize non-binary gender groups. At the Berkeley Haas Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership, they track these AI systems for all sorts of bias since 1988 to present day. And I can share with you a link to their kind of running spreadsheet of these AI systems around the world. And so far of 133, as of 2021, 133 bias systems across industries. they found that 44.2% has gender bias and 25.7% exhibit both gender and racial bias. And they discovered 6 primary impacts of these systems. For example, 70% resulted in lower quality of service for women and non-binary individuals. There was unfair allocation of resources, information, opportunities for women. So hiring systems, hiring software, for example, was unfairly treating women, really dismissing their applications. And so back to Dr. Ravi Sterling's talk, she highlights 5 proven strategies, and I'd like to hone in on this design creative women-centric technology as a strategy. What I'll be sharing with you is a framework, a methodology that you can use and iterate in your respective communities in order to design these creative women-centric technologies. So the design challenge, the design question that we might ask is, how might we advance digital gender equity or design gender smart technologies rather than embed and scale gender bias? Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to the Decolonial Design Futures Framework. Again, this is a result of the synthesis of my research findings, particularly among Filipina educators living in the Philippines, about decolonizing education. And it is, I define it as a collective iterative design approach that acknowledges the interconnectedness and multiplicities of the past, present, and future. It activates bold imagination and co-creates hyper-local preferred futures with indigenous and marginalized communities. So here it is. This is a 6-phase framework, and this is a non-linear iterative framework, meaning that you don't have to go about it step by step, every single step in order. You can iterate on it. You can go back and repeat certain steps. And you'll notice that I use my native language, Tagalog, to name these phases, but I encourage you to plug in your native languages wherever you're working as appropriate. So the first phase is called kwentuhan, or storytelling. And this is when you convene a diverse interdisciplinary group to share stories about a particular problem, in this case, gender digital equity. And it's important that you have a group instead of just a one-on-one conversation, because my study has shown that when you share stories with one another, it sparks all these insights that you may not have thought of on your own. And it's also important that you, as the facilitator, contextualize these individual stories with a larger story of the community. And that includes the world history or the community's history. It could be decades or centuries from now that you analyze these individual stories within that larger story. The second phase is pagmumuni-muni, or reflection. And this is when you ask your group to reflect on their specific emotions. How did they feel when they were listening to each other's stories? Because when you pinpoint those emotions, you begin to make sense of what you heard, and that leads to insights. So that's the kind of the progression that you're going for, is you share the story, you share how you feel, and then what meaning do you make out of these stories. And then you, as the facilitator, will notice any patterns between the micro narratives, the individual stories, and the macro narratives. So this is when you, as a facilitator, reflect on these patterns that you see between the small and the large stories. From there, once you generate the insights, you move on to hiraya, or imagination. And you, as a facilitator, will guide them to imagine possible futures at least 10 years from now. And 10 years is a magic number for futurists because a lot can happen in 10 years. So when you think about your own life 10 years ago, just think about all the changes that have happened in your life, professionally, personally. Think about how those dramatic changes have occurred just within a decade. And even in society, we tend to think of our lives in decades, your 20s, 30s, 40s, even culture and fashion and music, they change decade over decade. And of course, you can choose any number you want. And there are many different ways you can help exercise the creative juices of your group. So one technique I've used is called the Futures Triangle, which I used in Kigali, Africa, for a design charrette on looking at the future of Young African Leaders Initiative, and that this could be a whole other topic. There are many techniques for exercising imagination. And then after you've ideated as a group, you choose your favorite ideas as a group, and then you move on to the fourth phase, which is the panghinaharap na artifact, or artifact of the future. This is when you create a mock-up of an idea that the group feels will have a high impact on the problem and represents a preferred future. In my study, I asked the group to create a digital prototype. And so they created a communications prototype, meaning a flyer that is dated 10 years from now, communicating the idea that they generated. So the ideas they had were an alternative learning school system. So they were calling for enrollment. So just a kind of advertisement for students to enroll and parents to enroll. And then the other prototype was for a 5-year PhD program for students who want to become teachers. So it's important to have a physical or a very a tangible object that represents that preferred future, because you want to show this to your community and ask for their feedback on how they feel about this future. Because it's very difficult for people to imagine the future without something tangible to react to. In a way, that mock-up, that tangible asset and object, helps transport your audience to a future more easily than if you just described it in abstract ways or in words. So that's the beauty of the artifact of future. And again, this is another futures technique that I could do a whole session on. There are many different prototypes and artifacts that you can create. So once you have that artifact, then you would go to phase 5, which is Disenyong Makatarungan, which means design justice. And again, I'll dive deeper into this in a moment. But basically, it's a triple Venn diagram that asks who will be involved in the design process, who might benefit, and who might be harmed from this design. So essentially, this is a way for you to assemble your team and plan for how you're going to get to that future that you just articulated through your artifact. So this is a planning and implementation phase. And then, creating the artifact, making it into a reality. And then the last phase is paulit-ulit na pagsubok, or testing and iteration. This is when you collaborate with your community, you test it and iterate it with your community members until you make your preferred future a reality. So this is these are the 6 phases. And again, it's nonlinear, and there are many different ways that you can approach each phase, right? And there's a set of values and mindsets, again, based on the research that comes with this framework. The first is kapwa, which is a Filipino core value, basically meaning you're sharing your inner self. And when I presented this, for example, in Kigali, I encouraged them to plug in again their own word that might be similar to kapwa. One word that emerged was Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So that kind of relationality concept, the way we relate with one another, that's basically what we're going for here. Through collective storytelling, decolonial design futurists share one another's inner selves. Kapwa stems from collective values of humanity and the deep respect for the dignity and inherent worth of a fellow human being. The next is non-linearity and synchronicity of time. And aside from the circle communicating that this framework, this process is nonlinear, it also communicates the idea that past, present, and future events are nonlinear and that they're interconnected and can influence one another. So the past can influence the future can influence the present. It's all very fluid. It's more of a non-Western concept because in the Western world, it's mostly time is mostly seen as a linear kind of arrow, right? Instead of a circle, where you basically relegate the past and the present as less important than the future. They're all discrete events, but in the nonlinear and synchronic nature of time, the concept of time, they're all interconnected and they all influence one another, very fluid. The next is multiple futurities, when we acknowledge that there are many narratives or points of origin, both in the past and the present, meaning that there is no one universal timeline of the world. There are many different points of origin that we can actually diverge from. And from these points of origin, you can imagine multiple futures. We also consider long-term consequences of our actions, including the harms and benefits on the environment. And this is where the 7th generation principle comes in. It's originated by the Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois nation. Basically, they emphasize that we need to consider the decisions and actions that we make today on the next 7 generations. A bold imagination is really about understanding a problem from multiple perspectives first, and then identifying our emotional reactions to them, because that only then can we be more clear and have more bold and vivid imagination of the future. Hyperlocality is assuming that solutions are always contextualized to the hyperlocal community, recognizing that these solutions can influence global issues and vice versa. And you notice that I don't have a scaling phase in that framework. And sometimes design thinking framework traditionally will have that, scaling phase. You want to scale that solution, but this recognizes that, that each community is unique and that their solution might not be appropriate for the entire world, right? And then finally, transdisciplinary collaboration emphasizes cross-disciplinary, cross-sector, cross-country collaboration so that we can realize our imagined futures. This recognizes that everything, again, is interconnected. When we create change in education, for example, we need to collaborate with industry and government and academia. In the development world, we need to collaborate with policymakers, with technologists, with your local communities, right? So transdisciplinary is really the way to go. So I just wanted to take a moment to emphasize how it departs from traditional design thinking framework. First is that it considers historical and community context. It's very central to this framework. Typically in traditional design thinking, you focus on the present moment, on the pain points of the end user now, and then you try to solve that problem immediately. But this is more, basically it expands our time horizons, both looking back and then looking forward, and always contextualizing it within that history and that community. It also emphasizes perspectives and needs of Indigenous and marginalized communities. It's holistic, participatory, attentive to power dynamics. So really paying attention to what's going on in the relationships between the marginalized groups and those with power. And then it seeks to actualize equitable, community-driven futures. So again, this is about social change doesn't happen overnight, right? So it takes several years. So really thinking about at least 10 years from now, what do we want as a society? And then it incorporates design justice principles, emphasizing ethical concerns. I'll stop for a moment here in case anyone has it. Oh, we're saving the questions until the end, right?
You're welcome. If
Okay.
you have questions, they're welcome to chime in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can interrupt me if you have some questions, but design justice is a framework for analysis of how design distributes benefits and burdens between various groups of people. It focuses explicitly on the ways that design reproduces and or challenges the matrix of domination. And this was a concept created by Sasha Constanza Chalk, and she has an open access book called Design Justice, Community-Led Practices to Build the Worlds We Need. And I encourage you to read that, and I can share that link after the session. And just to tell more about the thinking behind this design justice, it acknowledges that in a design process, there are certain people that are included in that design process and certain people that are excluded. And typically the benefits go to those who are designing, who are included in the design process. And typically they're more powerful. And the benefits it doesn't really benefit the less powerful. Same thing, the harms are distributed to the less powerful. The more powerful or the designers are not as harmed as much. So here's the triple Venn diagram. And again, this is a way for you to analyze existing products and services that have been designed, and also to plan for your preferred futures. So the question would be, who was involved in the process? Or who will be involved in this design process? Second is who benefited or who will benefit from this design process. And again, this includes the environment. Who was harmed, who will be harmed, again, including the environment. And then I'll end here with the design justice principles. And as I mentioned, I'm part of this global community of practice, and we have a website that you can look at and dive deeper into these principles. So the first one is design. We use design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities. We center the voices of those who are directly impacted. In this case, and for this topic, it would be women in our communities. We prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. We view change as emergent from an accountable, accessible, and collaborative process rather than as a point at the end of a process. And to me, when I read this, it really was insightful for me because as a grant writer, for every grant is asks for outcomes, right? What outcomes are you going to measure as a result of your intervention? And to me, that always felt something wasn't sitting quite right with me whenever I had to formulate that, because it meant that I had to predetermine what change will happen. But this principle recognizes the organic and emergent nature of change, and it really focuses on the process. What's important is really the journey, right? The process instead of the outcome. So this is really important to design justice, this notion. we see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert. So the designer as making it easy for the community to talk to one another, to imagine together, and to collaborate with one another. We believe that everyone is an expert based on their own lived experience. We share design knowledge and tools with our communities. We work towards sustainable, community-led, and controlled outcomes. And then we work towards non-exploitative solutions that reconnect us to the earth and to each other. That's another thing that I believe the traditional design thinking framework may lack, is this layer of ethical concerns for the environment. For example, many products and services, products that we have are, based on this concept of planned obsolescence, where you intentionally design products that are not meant to last. And so that, many of those pollute the earth, right? And so this is another key emphasis of the decolonial design futures framework. And then finally, this is one of the most insightful principles that I, one of my favorites in this list of 10. Before seeking a new design solution, we look for what is already working at the community level. We honor and uplift traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge and practices. So typically when we go into a community and we're told, let's design something creative, the instinct is that we're going to create something from scratch, right? We're going to do something innovative and something new. But there is really wisdom in really digging and looking for the knowledge that has already been there, and the wisdom that already exists there, and really uplifting that and amplifying it, so you don't necessarily have to do something new all the time when you're creating or co-designing with a community. So yeah, so that is those are the design justice principles. Again, this is an introduction to the framework. I can go deeper into any of these phases if you'd like, and if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them any comments that you might have about this concept and the design justice framework.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this overview and this presentation. I'm gonna see, or maybe Angie, you can highlight me. There I am. Now I'm not a voice in the void. So thank you so much for going over that. That was incredible. And I'm listening and thinking about a hallmark of N50 often is action, right? And what I love about this is how to embed principles and concrete applications to guide to get to thoughtful action, right? That strengths-based approach, that asset-based approach that is so important when you think about that hyperlocal context. So at this point, we will transition to some Q&A from the audience, and those attending, please feel free to use either the Q&A or the chat. We'll look for questions from any direction from where they come. And as you work on those, I wanted to kick off a little bit with a shout out regarding your framework. So the For Womenkind team, the mentorship committee, utilized it actually in our own design process to really uncover what we wanted to be at the heart and soul of a stellar mentorship experience and program, connecting women from N50 organizations to women for whom digital connectivity is relatively new. And as we spoke about the framework and how to use it, one of the things that really struck me was the use of storytelling as a way to personalize thinking and make it very individual, but also storytelling as this unifying agent. And it feels really simple, but it isn't. And I was listening deeply to what you said about identifying those emotional reactions to the stories in this your overview, and that's really important. I think often overlooked, but just like we see from the data from the GSMA Mobile Gender Gap Report, there are still gaps, though closing between men and women in low and middle income countries. but the regional and local context matters greatly in how specific barriers impact that experience. So, for instance, while we know affordability and gender and digital literacy are overarching or unifying stories, it's only when you zoom in on the personal experience that you can design for that. And in your framework as a user, there's a nice back and forth between trends and big picture experiences and that individual experience. So I'd love to hear more about how you at Next Lab, in your own work perhaps, approach or would like to approach a task like designing for women and girls, an equitable digital experience in a way that allows for that multitude of experiences that might include. How do you, and you kind of talked about it, but we'd love to hear your personal story and connections to that as well.
Yeah. So at Next Lab, we understand that women are underrepresented in the tech field. So Next Lab sits in the Enterprise Technology Service Organization for ASU. And we cover various emerging tech, right? So our goal is to uncover these future skills and connect our students with industry and government organizations to create their own proofs of concepts and minimum viable products for different problems that society has with using this emerging tech. So we focus on generative AI and spatial computing. We're becoming kind of the go-to center for digital twinning capabilities, as well as game design. So we focus on those converging technologies. And it's always a challenge to attract girls and women to this field. So for example, at our every semester, we hire students, up to 50 students to work in interdisciplinary ways. And we noticed that there weren't women applicants, there weren't female applicants last semester. And so we decided to extend that deadline and explicitly call out in our LinkedIn post, for example, in our advertising materials for recruiting, that we encourage women to apply for these positions because they have been traditionally underrepresented in the field. And when we talk to our students, we don't expect them to have the skills already, right? Because these are future skills. We're looking for their enthusiasm and their passion for problem solving, for working in interdisciplinary groups. The sensibility of play. We ask how they incorporate play into their work or how they go about life. And really just also their passion for helping their community. So if they have those aptitudes and these capabilities and these affinities, it doesn't really matter if they have these technical skills yet, because we believe in upskilling, right? So actually 20% of their time is devoted to upskilling, and they can choose whatever courses they might want as long as they teach their peers, right? So there's a teaching and learning component there. So that's how we think about when we design these new proofs of concepts. We want to make sure that the people who are designing these include women, non-binary individuals. We also have, aside from the gender aspect, is first generation students, international students, and people from all sorts of backgrounds, neurodivergent individuals. So we think about what would we like the future of this field look like. So we saw that only 22% are females, right, in AI and data science fields. So that's one of the things that we think about is how do we encourage more women and girls to participate in this field, and not be intimidated by the tech aspect.
Well, and I'm
Uh,
guessing just the processes of your design framework help that. Once you've experienced the process of going through, it is very, invitational and open and accessible, which honors everyone's voice, which is maybe a new experience for some folks. And we do have some questions coming in from the Q&A around facilitating and guiding through that design framework. And so let's kind of work through some look like we need to take a closer look at them. But so if we go kind of logistics first, and then we'll get into how to collaborate. But in your view, is there a minimum or maximum number for the group? I'm guessing, thank you, Emma, for that question, but I'm guessing it's around a group who's engaging in the design process.
Yes, yes. So that depends on your situation, but I like 6 to 10, 5 to 10, something like that. Now, if you go beyond 10 people, you might need another facilitator. So because you need to actively listen and facilitate, right? So yeah, so smaller groups work well. If you have bigger than that, then I recommend breaking out into groups and having one facilitator each.
Right. Okay. That's really helpful. And thinking about seeing it in action, you had a room of, I don't know, probably 100, and there were multiple tables where they were able to engage in a smaller way.
Yeah,
So there are ways to do it with smaller and greater numbers of total participants, however that may look. But I
yeah.
like the inclusion of that facilitative or the facilitator component needing to be there to really help it. From April Williamson, this is fascinating work, Bea. Thank you. I've helped facilitate a future-oriented design workshop for school district leaders in the US, and I found that it was challenging to get them out of the mindset of the now, the most pressing current challenges, their current models and assets, etc. Could you share some more facilitation tips and techniques to get people into the creative mindset?
Oh yes. Oh gosh, there are so many. Uh, but one favorite activity that I think you might have experienced, Erin, when we were in Kigali. It's called the human layers exercise. And basically, and I can is it April? I can send you kind of that exercise that you can try on your own. But basically, it's a way to exercise your temporal imagination. And I ask people, and this is not my exercise, this is a cultural activist's creation. Uh, the name is escaping me right now, but what they designed is basically asking the participants to close their eyes, and then um, this is best done when you're doing it in real time. But basically, you ask people to imagine a loved one from either your parent or grandparent or someone older than you, right? And then think about their life when they were, 5 years old, and sorry, when they were older now, and then they get younger and younger. And then you ask them to think of the next phase is asking them to think of a younger loved one, and then you think of them as they get older. So in my case, I've thought about my own toddler, my own son, and I think about I visualize what his 5-year birthday might look like, and then fast forward to 30 years, and then fast forward to his 90-year-old birthday. And then there are guiding questions to help people visualize it. But I like to start with that very personal, kind of a tangible way to imagine the past and also the future, because that embodies looking back to look forward um, in your own life that you can relate to. So really personalizing it so that you can connect emotionally to this concept of looking back to look forward. From there, once they have that kind of sensibility, right, then they can more easily imagine, their school district, right? Think about the children that are growing up in your schools. Um, so that's one technique that I like to share with folks, because it is very hard to remove yourself from the now. And when you simply just ask folks to think about the future, um, the the same regions in the brain light up when they're describing the present and describing the future, right? But like I said, if you create an artifact of the future, a tangible object that they can react to emotionally, that typically helps transport them into a different future. So I would emphasize also that artifact of the future. Um,
Yeah, that human layers exercise you described too had a physical, like a total physical body response, that component that went along with it, right? People actually stood up out of their chairs and
yeah,
anchored in, here's the present, now step backwards. And so
yeah,
you're physically stepping backwards into the past. That
yeah.
does kind of take all of the senses are required to light up the different parts of the brain probably, right? Is what
Yes,
that's the new
yes.
thing I'm having, right?
Exactly, and that's embodying that temporal imagination, because as you're stepping back, you're thinking back in time, right? And then as you step forward, you're looking forward in time.
That's
Uh, Highly emotional, especially if you're thinking about a loved one,
mhm,
right? That's what you want, is for people to understand this is what it means to imagine. Yeah.
mhm, neat. Okay, another question from Dr. Revy Sterling. Hi, Revy. You may have covered this, and I apologize, but what should we do when Indigenous communities or participants have words and concepts that English doesn't have an equivalent? I assume we should reach out to social scientists in countries in these cases for help contextualizing. Seems like a big margin for error, but I had not thought about this.
Oh no, I love that question. Yes, so there are many, uh, s- many concepts that don't have an English translation. In my own language, there's so many, um, and um, and that's why I ask, if when you're iterating this framework, that you plug in your own language. You might not have a direct translation for, let's say, Kapwa, but what's similar? What is the essence of that concept? So Ubuntu is very similar to Kapwa. Are there other concepts that are about relationality? Basically, the idea that I exist because I am part of a community, right? And that, emphasizing that you are not an individual person, that you need to be enabled, or um, you exist because there are other people around you, right? That you relate to. So there might be different words for that, different phrases, but the essence of that concept, I believe, is there in different cultures.
So it's kind of co-creating both kind of that values slide that you had and the framework itself, the
Yeah,
cycle that's not a cycle, the nonlinear
yeah,
cycle.
yeah, yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, and it leaves room. I'm not rigid about that framework. My hope is that it's a jumping point for communities to draw inspiration from. They can use it, change it around depending on what their community needs. For me, it's just a way to facilitate the thinking of any group,
Right.
right? This is just one way, but there may be other ways that you can come up with in your own words,
Mhm.
uh, depending on your culture.
Thank you for that. How can we collaborate with you on implementing these framework or principles? And I know this was something you were going to talk about anyway,
Yeah,
so to make
yeah,
sure.
you can reach out to me. I can share my email. So willing to collaborate with any of you to use this framework.
Awesome. Um, we also had a conversation recently. I'm kind of skipping around in some of our um, ideas that we had talked about in preparation for this session, but we had a really good conversation about women in positions of power or leadership that was really fascinating, kind of a different angle on this whole exercise, right? But it was reflective and hopeful and by way of action. What are some things that we might take away when we think about women in powers leadership, women in positions of power? Several of the people attending this call, right, are women in positions of power. Do you mind sharing some of your ideas regarding women's roles in supporting one another and what you're thinking about that?
Oh yeah, I'm a big proponent of like what you're doing with For Womenkind, the mentorship program. I myself have participated in the Chicago Innovation Women's Mentoring Program. I've created a women's entrepreneurship conference, a female founders pitch competition, facilitated many women's groups over the years, from high schoolers all the way to professionals throughout my career. So I really value convening as a group to share ideas, to vent, um, and to just to be with one another. And that could start with as simple as a group of your own in your own personal life, like a group of girlfriends that you really trust, right? And that you really truly uplift, where you truly uplift one another. Um, and it's also important to know that, you know, that there, for example, right now I'm working on a pilot program called Upstander program at ASU, because throughout my career, I've had a long career, more than 2 decades now in different sectors, that I have experienced and witnessed workplace bullying. And that doesn't just happen between, a man and, like a male a perpetrator. Uh, Same gender bullying can also happen, and I've seen it and I've experienced it. So it's also important as women to not just be a bystander when you see this happening, that you document it and that you stand up for the women around you. Sometimes the target of the bullying is not able to stand up for themselves, especially if the perpetrator is the supervisor, right? So it's important that the community recognizes that and sees that when they witness it, and then support that individual.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, so I advocate for creating upstander programs. And this is not just about standing up for bullying, but standing up for inequities and injustice everywhere. It doesn't just have to be in the workplace.
Yeah, and that definitely connects to one of the biggest topics that comes out in looking at gender digital equity around gender-based violence that shows up online.
Yeah.
Um, and we looked at some interesting things in preparation again from the UN Women website where statistics were shared, including, according to the Institute Development Studies, between 16 to 58% of women have experienced technology facilitated gender-based violence. And the Economist Intelligence Unit found that 38% of women have had personal experiences of online violence, and 85% of women who spend time online have witnessed digital violence against other women. And I know that's just, I mean, that is, those percentages are, I feel like they're shocking, right?
Yes.
And they've really come out in the Generation Equality Accountability Report, 2023. They have a priority action area, number 4, right, to prevent and eliminate online and tech facilitated gender-based violence and discrimination. That struck you, I think, as we were talking. What do
Yeah.
you see as, and it's connected to what you were just talking about personally, but then kind of going big trends again. What's an
Yeah.
important takeaway for us regarding then designing for women's engagement,
Yeah.
particularly online?
Yeah, yeah. So that includes when you're designing gender smart technologies or designing products and services for with women in your community. Is thinking about policy as well. So how can you engage government um, to support the health and well-being of women on a governmental level, making sure that there are support systems. Who can they go to? Who can they call? Who can they um, um, ask for help? Whether it's counselors or a hotline or a community that they can rely on. And then education too, because these kinds of things we don't get educated in school. You kind of learn by experiencing it
Fire,
in
yep.
example. So awareness, raising awareness about what to do, how to identify it, and what to do. What are some specific practical steps that you can do. I found this recent article or a study that was created by a University of the Philippines, and I'm going to put it on the chat. But they focused on Filipina women, technology facilitated gender-based violence on Filipina women. And they have a series of recommendations there, spanning governmental interventions and community and workplace initiatives. So that's I think would be really helpful for folks to read
Oh,
for inspiration. Yeah.
that's great. Well, as you can tell, we could probably sit and chat about this for a lot longer, and just to emphasize to the people who are listening right now, the framework really does. There's so many ways to expand and practices and applications within each of um, those points on the cycle of going through that process is so enlightening, and it's really just somebody said to get the creative juices flowing. It was so clear that there'd been so much thought put into that process and ways to make it personalized for whatever community is doing it. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing with our N50 and wider network about these ideas and about this work. We are grateful for your time, and thank you so much to everyone who attended and were active participants. Really appreciate you. And we look forward to our next session in September. And Dr. Bea, I hope you'll join us.
Of course, yes. And also, I wanted to make sure that you can access that link to our annual report for Next Lab. I'd love for you to read it and also reach out to me if you would like to collaborate or learn more about what we do.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Thanks
Hi,
for
everybody.